Soulmate screamed their love for you in front of everyone. You won't believe what happened. My beloved child, before you decide this message is not meant for you, pause for one impossible moment. There are certain echoes in life that never fade, no matter how loudly the world tries to silence them. Today is about one of those echoes. Somewhere beyond ordinary timing, beyond coincidence, beyond everything you believed was already finished, a single moment has begun unfolding. It started with a heart that could no longer carry its truth in silence. Imagine standing in a place where every eye is watching, every voice is waiting, every expectation is pulling in a different direction, and then, without warning, someone chooses honesty over fear. That is where this story begins. Stay with this until the final sentence of this chapter, because every piece you hear connects to the astonishing moment promised in the title. The ending of this part is only the doorway. Not every life-changing event begins with celebration. Sometimes it begins with trembling hands. Sometimes it begins with one deep breath that changes everything after it. There was a strange feeling in the air that day, as though time itself had slowed down to witness something extraordinary. People continued talking, smiling, moving from one conversation to another, unaware that an invisible turning point was quietly approaching. Yet one person among the crowd could feel it. They had carried emotions for far too long, hiding them beneath ordinary conversations, polite smiles, and unfinished goodbyes. Every passing day made those feelings stronger instead of weaker. Every attempt to move forward only circled back to one unforgettable name, yours. Have you ever wondered why some connections refuse to disappear, even after silence? Why certain people keep returning to your thoughts without explanation? What if those moments were never random? What if every unanswered question has been preparing you for one unforgettable revelation? Let those questions remain with you for a little longer. Their answers are closer than they appear. The one connected to your destiny reached a moment where pretending became heavier than telling the truth. They looked around and realized something unexpected. Approval from the crowd suddenly seemed small compared to the weight of their own heart. The opinions that once sounded overwhelming became distant whispers. For the first time, fear stopped controlling the story. Something greater awakened inside them, a quiet certainty that some truths deserve daylight, no matter who is listening. People often believe destiny arrives like thunder. Yet destiny usually whispers first. It sends small signs. Familiar dreams. Unexpected memories. A song heard at the perfect moment. A conversation that seems ordinary until hours later when its meaning suddenly becomes clear. Those whispers had been surrounding both of you for longer than either realized. Piece by piece, they were guiding everything toward a single unforgettable scene. Picture the atmosphere becoming strangely still. Conversations begin fading into the background. Laughter softens. The ordinary rhythm of the day pauses for reasons nobody can explain. Even those who had no idea what was happening instinctively turned their attention toward one place. Something invisible had captured everyone's focus before a single word had even been spoken. Isn't it fascinating how hearts sometimes recognize important moments before minds understand them? The person connected to your story stood there carrying years of unsaid emotions. Every memory returned at once. The missed opportunities. The misunderstandings. The moments they wished they had spoken sooner. Instead of regret making them step backward, it pushed them forward. Every heartbeat reminded them that another day of silence would become another lifetime of wondering what could have happened. Stay a little longer, because this is where everything begins shifting. Instead of rehearsed speeches or dramatic performances, something beautifully authentic happened. Their expression changed. Their eyes reflected complete certainty. They no longer looked toward the people surrounding them. Their attention searched for only one presence. The crowd became invisible. The noise disappeared. In that instant, only one truth mattered. Sometimes the loudest declaration is born from the quietest realization. You may think this story is only about another person's courage. It isn't. It is also about your own journey. Every challenge you've faced has quietly prepared you to recognize genuine sincerity when it finally appears. Without those experiences, this moment would not carry the same meaning. Every delay shaped your understanding. Every unanswered chapter strengthened your ability to value authentic connection instead of temporary attention. Then something impossible to ignore happened. The silence became almost sacred. The person took one steady breath. Their shoulders straightened. Their hesitation vanished. Every excuse disappeared. And with complete conviction, they opened their heart in front of everyone. No one expected what came next. Faces turned. Eyes widened. The atmosphere transformed in a heartbeat. Some people smiled in disbelief. Others stood completely speechless. Even those who believed they understood the situation realized they had only seen the surface. Because what was about to be spoken would challenge every assumption the crowd had carried until that very second. But before those unforgettable words reached every ear, something entirely unexpected interrupted the moment. And that unexpected interruption changed the direction of everything. Wait until the next chapter, because the truth behind that interruption is far more extraordinary than anyone could have imagined. A strange calm settled over everything, almost as if the next few seconds had been waiting years to arrive. No one spoke. No one looked away. Even those who had entered that place by coincidence felt an unexplainable urge to remain exactly where they were. Have you ever noticed how the most unforgettable moments announce themselves without making a sound? This was one of those moments. And what followed became impossible for anyone present to forget. The interruption that stopped everything was not an obstacle, it was a revelation in disguise. Just as your soulmate prepared to speak, someone unexpectedly stepped forward from the crowd. For a heartbeat, everyone assumed they would stop the moment from happening. Instead, they quietly moved aside, almost as though they understood that destiny should never be interrupted. That single gesture changed the atmosphere completely. Fear dissolved. Doubt lost its voice. The path ahead suddenly became clear. Then your soulmate looked directly toward the place where their heart had always been pointing. Every hidden emotion. Every silent hope. Every unanswered prayer inside their own journey reached the surface at once. There was no carefully written speech. No rehearsed performance. Only honesty. And then it happened. With a voice filled with certainty instead of hesitation, they declared before everyone that the connection they had tried to ignore had never disappeared. Every attempt to move on had only revealed one truth: they were always being led back to the same person. Back to the one who unknowingly transformed their perspective on life. Back to the one whose absence taught them the value of genuine presence. The crowd froze. No one expected such openness. Some people smiled because they recognized authentic courage when they saw it. Others simply stood there, realizing they were witnessing a moment that could never be repeated in exactly the same way again. But something even more remarkable unfolded. Instead of confusion spreading through the gathering, an unexpected feeling of peace began replacing every assumption. It was as though honesty carried its own quiet strength. Hearts that had arrived carrying opinions suddenly became listeners. Conversations stopped. Judgments disappeared. For one unforgettable stretch of time, truth became louder than speculation. What if this is how real transformation always begins? Not through force. Not through perfect timing. But through one brave decision to stop hiding. Perhaps that is why this story found you today. Not because it is asking you to predict your future, but because it reminds you that authentic connections never grow stronger through silence. They grow stronger through sincerity, patience, and the willingness to let truth breathe. As everyone continued watching, something subtle yet powerful happened inside the people surrounding the moment. They began remembering their own unfinished conversations, their own words left unsaid, their own opportunities still waiting to be embraced. One person's courage quietly awakened reflection in everyone else. Stay with this story a little longer, because the greatest surprise has not appeared yet. Then an older voice from the back of the gathering softly broke the silence. We all knew something important was waiting to be spoken. Those simple words carried extraordinary weight. Instead of creating division, they brought understanding. Instead of resistance, they invited acceptance. The room no longer felt like a place of spectators. It became a place where honesty inspired hope. If this story has stirred something meaningful within you so far, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories that explore courage, destiny, and meaningful human connections, subscribing helps you stay connected for the next chapter of this journey. Your presence here truly matters. But just when it seemed everything had reached its emotional peak, your soulmate slowly reached into their pocket. The expression on their face changed once again. It wasn't fear. It wasn't uncertainty. It was quiet confidence. They held something in their hand that no one expected to see. The crowd leaned forward. Questions filled every mind. Whatever they were about to reveal had been protected for a very long time. And the truth connected to that small, mysterious object was about to explain why they had finally chosen to declare their feelings in front of everyone. The next chapter doesn't simply continue this story. It completely transforms everything you think you understand so far. Before your mind tries to guess what was inside their hand, allow this next moment to unfold naturally. Some truths lose their power when they are rushed. Others become unforgettable only when every missing piece finally finds its place. This is that kind of moment. Everything you have heard until now has been leading here, yet what happens next is even more meaningful than anyone in that gathering imagined. Stay until the final line of this chapter, because one quiet revelation is about to redefine the entire story. Your soulmate slowly opened their hand. There was no dramatic treasure. No extravagant symbol. Only a small, carefully protected keepsake. To everyone else, it looked ordinary. But to them, it represented every day they refused to let hope disappear. Someone whispered, "They've been carrying that all this time?" Another voice answered softly, "Apparently, yes." The silence deepened. Your soulmate smiled, not because every question had been answered, but because they no longer needed to hide the truth. They explained that this simple keepsake reminded them of one promise they had silently made to themselves: if life ever gave them another chance to be completely honest, they would never let fear speak louder than their heart again. At that instant, something remarkable happened. The crowd stopped focusing on the object. They began focusing on the courage behind it. People often believe extraordinary moments require extraordinary things. But real turning points are different. They are created by ordinary people making extraordinary decisions. What if the greatest transformation in any journey begins the moment someone refuses to live behind uncertainty? Think about that for a second. How many opportunities disappear simply because people wait for the perfect time? How many meaningful conversations remain unfinished because tomorrow always seems easier than today? Your soulmate had finally discovered that waiting forever is its own kind of silence. And silence was no longer the future they wanted. As those thoughts settled into everyone's hearts, an unexpected reaction spread through the gathering. People weren't applauding because someone had spoken loudly. They were moved because authenticity had replaced hesitation. The atmosphere felt lighter. Almost hopeful. Even strangers found themselves smiling without fully understanding why. Some moments carry a quiet energy that reminds everyone present what honesty feels like. Then your soulmate took one final step forward. Not to impress anyone. Not to prove anything. Simply to complete the sentence they had carried inside for so long. They said that love is never measured by how perfectly life unfolds, but by the courage to remain truthful when circumstances become uncertain. They admitted that every twist, every delay, every unexpected season had taught them one lesson: genuine connection is strengthened by patience, respect, and unwavering sincerity. Those words lingered in the air long after they were spoken. No one rushed to interrupt. No one tried to change the moment. Everyone simply allowed it to exist. And perhaps that is why this story found you today. Not to promise impossible outcomes. Not to predict your future. But to remind you that authenticity has a quiet strength the world can never imitate. Whenever someone chooses truth over fear, something meaningful changes, not only inside them, but inside everyone fortunate enough to witness it. Before this chapter closes, hold on to one final thought. Life has an extraordinary way of bringing clarity after long seasons of uncertainty. The moments that seem delayed are often preparing hearts to recognize what truly matters. Whether your own story is beginning, continuing, or still unfolding, never underestimate the power of patience, kindness, and honest communication. Because sometimes, the loudest declaration isn't the one everyone hears. It's the one that finally frees the person who was brave enough to speak. And just as the gathering slowly began to settle, one person quietly smiled and said, "This wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of a completely new chapter. The journey continues. Just when everyone believed the story had reached its beautiful conclusion, destiny unfolded one final surprise. Moments like these never end where people expect them to. They continue quietly, revealing meanings that could never be understood in the excitement of the first revelation. If you've stayed with this journey until now, you're about to witness why every previous moment mattered. The final piece has been waiting patiently for this exact second. As the gathering slowly began to disperse, people were still talking about the courage they had witnessed. Some smiled as they walked away. Others remained standing, reflecting on conversations they themselves had postponed for far too long. The atmosphere no longer carried tension, it carried possibility. Your soulmate didn't rush after the crowd. They simply stood there for a moment, taking in everything that had just happened. Not because they expected applause. Not because they wanted recognition. But because something inside them finally felt free. For the first time in a long while, they were no longer carrying the weight of unspoken feelings. The truth had been released into the world, and strangely, that alone brought peace. Then something unexpected happened. A young child, who had quietly watched everything from a distance, walked over with a gentle smile and asked, "Why does everyone look happier now?" The question was so simple that no one answered immediately. Finally, an elderly woman nearby smiled and softly replied, "Because honesty has a way of making every heart a little lighter." Those words lingered in the air. In that instant, people realized this moment had become much bigger than one declaration of love. It had reminded everyone that genuine feelings should never be hidden behind endless fear or uncertainty. Perhaps that is why this story reached your screen today. Not to convince you that every story unfolds the same way. Not to promise dramatic endings. But to remind you that courage, patience, and sincerity always leave a lasting impact, even when the outcome cannot be predicted. Think back over your own journey. How many times have you grown stronger because life asked you to wait? How many unexpected turns eventually revealed a lesson you couldn't see at first? Sometimes the greatest gift isn't the destination. It's the person you become while walking toward it. Your soulmate understood that truth now. Their greatest victory wasn't simply speaking in front of everyone. Their greatest victory was becoming someone who no longer allowed fear to write the next chapter of their life. And perhaps that's the quiet invitation hidden inside this story for you as well. Choose authenticity. Choose kindness. Choose conversations that bring clarity instead of confusion. Because every meaningful relationship is built one honest moment at a time. If this journey encouraged you or gave you something meaningful to reflect on, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. And if stories like this help you slow down, think deeply, and appreciate the power of sincere human connection, subscribing is a simple way to continue the journey together. As the sun began to set, your soulmate took one last look at the place where everything had changed. There was no need for another speech. No need for another dramatic moment. One quiet smile said everything words no longer needed to explain. The crowd had witnessed a declaration. But what truly changed that day wasn't the crowd. It was the heart that finally chose truth over silence. And sometimes, That single choice becomes the beginning of an entirely new future. Until the next story, remember this. The most unforgettable chapters of life are rarely written by perfect timing. They are written by people who finally become brave enough to be themselves. One final thought before this journey fades into memory: what if the loudest moment of the story was never the declaration itself? What if the real miracle was everything that quietly began afterward? Stay with me for these last moments, because the ending is not about applause or excitement. It is about the lasting ripple created when one sincere choice inspires countless others. Days passed. The crowd returned to their ordinary routines. The conversations slowly became memories. Yet something unusual remained. People who had witnessed that unforgettable moment found themselves making different decisions in their own lives. Some reached out to family members they hadn't spoken to in years. Others apologized where pride had once stood. A few finally expressed gratitude they had postponed for far too long. One honest declaration had become the spark for many quiet transformations. Your soulmate noticed this too. They realized that courage has a remarkable quality. It never belongs to just one person. The moment someone chooses authenticity, it quietly gives others permission to do the same. That realization brought an even deeper peace. There was no longer any desire to prove anything. No need to convince the world. No race against time. Only confidence that truth has its own perfect rhythm. Perhaps this is the hidden message woven through every chapter of this story. Life is not measured by the number of people who understand you immediately. It is measured by the moments you remain true to yourself, even when certainty has not yet arrived. What if the greatest victories are the ones that begin inside the heart long before anyone else notices them? Take a moment and reflect on your own path. Every delay may have been preparing you. Every unexpected turn may have strengthened you. Every unanswered season may have quietly shaped your character for the opportunities still ahead. Sometimes the future isn't waiting for you to become someone different. Sometimes it is simply waiting for you to trust the person you have already become. Your soulmate finally understood that. Instead of looking backward with regret, they looked forward with hope. Instead of wondering, what if I had spoken sooner? They smiled and thought, I'm grateful I finally chose honesty. That single shift changed everything. The story that began with uncertainty ended with clarity. The silence that once felt heavy became peaceful. The fear that once seemed impossible to overcome became nothing more than a distant memory. And the declaration that echoed through the crowd became something far greater than words. It became a reminder. A reminder that authenticity leaves a legacy. A reminder that sincere hearts are never weakened by honesty. A reminder that meaningful connections are built through respect, patience, and courage, not perfection. So if this story found you today, carry one simple truth with you. Never underestimate the quiet power of choosing authenticity over fear. You never know whose life your courage might inspire. And perhaps, somewhere beyond today's chapter, another beautiful beginning is already preparing itself, one honest decision at a time. Until our paths cross again in the next story, keep your heart open, your spirit hopeful, and your eyes ready for the unexpected, because sometimes the most extraordinary chapters begin just after everyone else believes the story is over. The story may seem complete, but listen carefully to this final whisper, because the deepest truth was never hidden in the crowd, the words, or the applause. It was hidden inside a choice. A choice that quietly changed every chapter that followed. If you've stayed with this journey until now, then this closing message is especially for you. Sometimes the ending of one story becomes the beginning of your own. Long after that unforgettable day, people still remembered the moment when your soulmate chose courage over hesitation. Yet whenever they spoke about it, they rarely repeated the exact words that had been declared. Instead, they remembered the feeling. They remembered how hope suddenly seemed possible. They remembered how sincerity could transform an ordinary day into an unforgettable one. They remembered that genuine emotion never needs to compete for attention, it naturally finds its place. Your soulmate carried that lesson into every new step of life. They no longer searched for perfect timing. They no longer waited for every circumstance to become ideal. They simply chose to live with openness, patience, and quiet confidence. And strangely enough, life began responding differently. New opportunities appeared where closed doors once existed. Conversations became easier. Smiles became more genuine. The future no longer felt uncertain, it felt full of possibility. Perhaps this is the message destiny has been gently placing before you throughout this entire journey. Not every meaningful moment arrives with loud announcements. Some arrive as quiet invitations. An invitation to let go of unnecessary fear. An invitation to trust the strength you've built through every challenge. An invitation to believe that authentic connections are nurtured through honesty, kindness, and respect. Imagine looking back one day and realizing that the moment which changed everything wasn't dramatic at all. It was simply the day you decided to stop doubting your own worth. The day you chose hope instead of hesitation. The day you believed that truth, spoken with grace, always has value. That is the kind of ending that continues long after the final page. And maybe, just maybe, that is why this story crossed your path today. Not to predict tomorrow. Not to promise impossible outcomes. But to remind you that your own journey still holds unwritten chapters filled with growth, wisdom, and meaningful connections. The crowd from that unforgettable day eventually went home. The voices became memories. The moment became history. Yet its message continued traveling from one heart to another, quietly inspiring people who would never even meet each other. That is the remarkable thing about courage. Its influence reaches far beyond the moment it is first seen. If this story stayed with you, I'd genuinely love to know which moment touched you the most. Your thoughts in the comments may encourage someone else who happens to read them. And if these cinematic journeys of hope, awareness, and meaningful connection resonate with you, subscribing simply means we'll continue exploring more stories together. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, your soulmate took one peaceful breath and smiled, not because every mystery had been solved, but because they had finally become the kind of person who could face the future without hiding from the truth. And somewhere beyond the setting light, a new chapter quietly opened. Not written by chance. Not written by fear. But written by courage, sincerity, and the quiet belief that the most beautiful stories are the ones that inspire others to become their truest selves. Thank you for walking through this journey. Until the next story, keep moving forward with hope, because sometimes the greatest surprise isn't waiting for you ahead. Sometimes, it is already growing within you, before this journey comes to its final heartbeat. Let one last thought settle into your mind. Every unforgettable story eventually reaches a quiet ending, but the strongest endings never ask you to look backward. They gently invite you to look ahead. If you've stayed until this final chapter, then perhaps you were never here by accident. Perhaps you were here because this message was waiting for the exact moment you were ready to hear it. Months later, people still remembered the day your soulmate stood before everyone and chose honesty over hesitation. Yet something interesting happened. As time passed, fewer people talked about the crowd. They stopped talking about the place. They even forgot many of the exact words that were spoken. But no one forgot the courage. Because courage leaves an imprint that memories cannot erase. It quietly lives inside the hearts of everyone who witnesses it. Your soulmate discovered something that day that many spend a lifetime searching for. Real peace doesn't come from hearing everyone agree with you. It comes from knowing you were true to yourself. That realization became the foundation of every new chapter they stepped into. They smiled more often. They carried less worry. They no longer wondered whether they had done the right thing. The answer was already inside them. The greatest victory had never been winning anyone's approval. It had been finding the freedom to speak from the heart. Perhaps this final message belongs to you as much as it belonged to them. There will always be moments when uncertainty whispers that you should wait a little longer. That you should hide a little more. That you should let another opportunity pass. But life has a beautiful way of rewarding those who move with sincerity instead of fear. Not because every outcome becomes perfect, but because every honest step builds a stronger version of you. Imagine looking back years from now. Which choice would bring more peace? The words you spoke with kindness, or the words you never allowed yourself to say? Sometimes the answer to that single question changes everything. This story was never about predicting your future. It was about awakening something timeless. The reminder that authentic connections grow through trust. The reminder that meaningful relationships are strengthened by respect. The reminder that your greatest strength is not pretending to be fearless, it is choosing courage even when your heart is beating fast. And maybe, just maybe, someone watching this today needed to hear that more than anything else. If this journey stayed with you until the very end, thank you for giving it your time and your attention. If a particular moment spoke to your heart, share it below. Your words might become the encouragement another viewer has been searching for. And if stories filled with hope, purpose, and meaningful reflections are something you enjoy, you're always welcome to return for the next chapter. As the final light faded